They thought his cheap suit was an invitation to humiliate him. They thought the waitress was just nobody who cleaned up their mess. They were wrong. Dead wrong. In the high-stakes world of Manhattan finance, Julian Thorne thought he was the predator, mocking a silent older man sitting alone in the corner of the Gilded Lily. The insults were loud. The laughter was cruel. But the room went dead silent the moment the waitress dropped her tray and spoke to the stranger in fluent, aristocratic Italian. What happened next didn't just ruin a dinner, it destroyed an empire. This is the story of how arrogance met its match. The rain in Manhattan wasn't just rain. It was a freezing, relentless assault that turned the city into a grey blur. But inside the Gilded Lily, the weather didn't exist. The air here smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and old money. It was the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than Eleanor Vance's rent for the entire year. Eleanor adjusted the collar of her uniform, wincing as the stiff fabric rubbed against her neck. She was 24, tired, and currently invisible. That was the job description. Be fast, be efficient, be silent. Table 4 needs a refill on the sparkly Elena. Move it, hissed Henri, the floor manager. Henry was a short man who wore lifts in his shoes and treated the waitstaff like indentured servants. And smile. You look like a funeral mute. Yes, Henri, Eleanor murmured, grabbing a chilled bottle of San Pellegrino. Table 4 was the problem table tonight. It was occupied by Julian Thorne and his entourage. Julian was the CEO of Apex Stream, a tech startup that had gone public last week, turning him into a millionaire overnight. He was 30 years old, wearing a bespoke suit that screamed new money, and he had the loudest voice in the room. "So I told the board," Julian bellowed, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir, "if you want to play in the big leagues, you cut the deadweight. We fired 300 people in a morning. Bam! Stock went up 4 points by lunch." His friends, 3 men who looked like clones of him, just with slightly less expensive watches, roared with laughter. "Ruthless Jules, I love it," one of them said, slapping the table. Elena approached the table, keeping her eyes lowered. She poured the water with practiced precision. "Hey, sweetheart," Julian said, not looking at her, but waving a hand in her face. "This water isn't cold enough. Get me ice, and tell the chef my steak is taking too long. I have a meeting with the devil in an hour." "I apologize, sir," Elena said, her voice soft. "I'll get the ice immediately." "Don't apologize. Just be competent," Julian snapped, turning his back on her to high-five the man next to him. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat and retreated to the kitchen. She needed this job. Her mother's medical bills were piling up in a stack of envelopes on her kitchen counter in Queens. Every shift at the Gilded Lily was a battle against her own pride. But she had no choice. She had grown up in Rome until she was 12, the daughter of an art restorer, before life fell apart and they moved to the States. She had memories of a better life, of dignity, but those felt like a dream now. When she walked back out onto the floor, she noticed the atmosphere shift. The heavy oak doors at the front had opened. The host, a snooty young man named Pierce, looked confused. A man had walked in. He wasn't like the usual clientele. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair that needed a trim. He wore a dark suit, but it was cut in an old-fashioned style, perhaps 10 years out of date. It was clean, but it lacked the sharp, aggressive tailoring of the men at Julian Thorne's table. He carried a wet umbrella and looked weary. "Do you have a reservation?" Pierce asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. He didn't offer to take the man's coat. "I do not," the man said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and heavily accented. "I was hoping for a quiet table, just for one." Pierce looked him up and down, practically sneering. "We are fully booked, sir. Perhaps the diner down the street is more your speed." Elena watched from the service station, her heart pinching. She hated the way they treated people who didn't look like walking ATMs. The older man sighed, looking around the room. His eyes landed on a small, two-top table near the kitchen doors. It was the worst seat in the house, usually reserved for overflow or staff meals. "That table is empty." Pierce rolled his eyes. "Fine. But we need the table back in 60 minutes, and there is a minimum spend." "I understand," the man said quietly. As he walked past table 4, Julian Thorne stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the older man, then at his friends. A cruel grin spread across his face. "Check this out," Julian whispered loudly. "Did the homeless shelter have a dress code tonight?" The table erupted in laughter. The older man didn't react, but Eleanor saw his jaw tighten slightly as he sat down in the drafty corner near the kitchen. The restaurant was a theater of cruelty, and Julian Thorne was the lead actor. Eleanor was assigned to the older man's table because none of the other servers wanted to take it. They knew the tip would be negligible. "Hi," Elena said, placing a menu down gently. "Welcome to the Gilded Lily. I'm Elena." The man looked up. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and incredibly sad. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Thank you, Elena," he said. He didn't open the menu. "I'm just tired. A long flight, a bad week. Just bring me the house red wine and the bolognese, please." "Of course," she smiled. "The bolognese is excellent. It's a northern recipe." He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "We shall see." As Eleanor walked away, Julian Thorne's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Hey, waitress!" Julian shouted. Elena froze and turned. "Yes, Mr. Thorne?" "Who is that guy?" Julian pointed his fork openly at the older man. "Is he a health inspector, or did he just get lost on his way to the bus station?" "He is a customer, sir," Elena said stiffly. "He's ruining the ambience." Julian laughed, loosening his tie. He was drunk on wine and power. "Hey, old man." The entire restaurant went quiet. The older man continued to stare at the tablecloth, his hands folded. "I'm talking to you," Julian yelled. "How much is your suit? I want to buy it to use as a rag for my car." One of Julian's associates, a man named Marcus, leaned in. "Leave him alone, Jules. He's nobody." "That's the point," Julian sneered. "I'm sick of nobodies taking up space. This is the Gilded Lily, not a soup kitchen." He grabbed a bread roll from the basket on his table and tossed it. It was a lazy throw, but it struck the older man on the shoulder. The room gasped. The older man slowly brushed the crumbs off his jacket. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He turned his head slowly to face Julian. "Young man," the stranger said, his English slow and deliberate. "You have had too much to drink. Enjoy your meal, and let me eat mine in peace." Julian's face turned bright red. He wasn't used to being corrected. He was the golden boy of Silicon Alley. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Excuse me?" Julian walked over, looming over the small table near the kitchen. He was tall, athletic, and threatening. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this restaurant and turn it into a parking lot just to fire the staff. And you're telling me what to do?" Henri, the manager, rushed over. But instead of defending the older customer, he turned his back on him. "Mr. Thorne, please," Henry pleaded, sweating. "Is he bothering you? I can have him removed." Elena dropped the tray she was holding on the counter. She couldn't believe it. Henry was going to kick out the victim. "Yeah, he's bothering me," Julian said, smirking. "He smells like mothballs and failure. Get him out." Henry turned to the older man, his face hardening. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're causing a disturbance. The older man looked at Henri, then at Julian. I have ordered dinner. I am sitting quietly. We reserve the right to refuse service, Henri said, snapping his fingers for security. This is shameful, the man said softly. Shameful is wearing that tie in 2025, Julian laughed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. He crumpled it up and threw it onto the older man's plate. Here, go get a Happy Meal. Get out of my sight. The older man looked at the money on his empty plate. He didn't move. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. The other diners were watching, some amused, some uncomfortable, but no one said a word. They were all afraid of Julian Thorne, or they just didn't care about a man who looked like he didn't belong. Elena felt a heat rising in her chest. It was the same heat she felt when the doctors told her they couldn't treat her mother without insurance. It was the heat of injustice. She walked past Henri. She walked past the security guard. She stepped right between Julian Thorne and the table. Enough, Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Julian blinked, looking down at her. Excuse me? Did the help just speak? I said enough, Elena repeated, looking Julian in the eye. He is a guest. He hasn't done anything to you. Pick up your money and go back to your table. Elena, Henri shrieked. You are fired. Get out of here right now. I'll leave, Elena said, her hands trembling slightly. But not before this man gets an apology. Julian laughed so hard he choked. An apology? From me? To him? Look at him, sweetheart. He doesn't even speak English properly. He probably doesn't even know where he is. Julian leaned down, putting his face close to the older man's. Hey, nonno. Do you understand me? Or do I need to draw you a picture? The older man looked up at Julian, his expression unreadable. That was when Eleanor snapped. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the man. She saw the cut of his suit, old, yes, but hand-stitched. She saw the ring on his pinky finger, gold, worn smooth, bearing a crest she faintly recognized from history books she'd read as a child in Rome. And she realized something no one else had noticed. She took a deep breath, and the English language fell away. Mi scusi, signore, Elena said, her voice changing. It became musical, authoritative, and perfectly native. Mi dispiace per l'ignoranza di questi uomini. Non sanno che stanno parlando con un leone. Excuse me, sir. I am sorry for the ignorance of these men. They do not know they are speaking to a lion. The older man's eyes widened. The sadness vanished, replaced by a spark of intense interest. He sat up straighter. Sei Italiana? He asked, his voice suddenly sharp, commanding. You are Italian. Romana, signore, Elena replied, ignoring Julian, who was looking between them with confusion. E vedo che anche lei è lontano da casa, ma la dignità non dovrebbe avere confini. Roman, sir, and I see you are also far from home. But dignity should have no borders. The man slowly stood up. He wasn't hunched anymore. He seemed to grow 3 inches taller. The weary traveller was gone. In his place was something else entirely. What are you jabbering about? Julian demanded. Speak English. The older man looked at Elena, ignoring Julian completely. He smiled, a genuine warm smile. Come ti chiami, figliola? What is your name, child? Elena, signore. Elena, the man repeated. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a phone, a very expensive, very secure satellite phone. He finally turned to Julian. You asked if I knew who you were, the man said. His English was still accented, but the hesitation was gone. The gravel in his voice now sounded like grinding rocks. Mr. Julian Thorne, CEO of Apex Stream, stock ticker APXS. Julian frowned. Yeah. So? And you, the man pointed to Henry, manager of the Gilded Lily, owned by the Sterling Hospitality Group. How do you know that? Henry stammered. Because, the man said, dialing a number without looking at the screen, my name is Lorenzo Valenti. Julian's face went pale. The blood drained out of him so fast he looked like a ghost. Valenti, Marcus, the friend at the table, whispered. As in, Valenti Heavy Industries? The company that just acquired the majority share of the European tech sector? The same company, Lorenzo said calmly into the phone, that is currently in final negotiations to buy Apex Stream to save it from bankruptcy. Julian dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the floor, red wine staining the expensive carpet like blood. Lorenzo put the phone to his ear. The room was so silent you could hear the dial tone shift to a connection. Pronto? Giovanni? Lorenzo spoke into the phone, his eyes locked on Julian's terrified face. Buy the debt. All of it. And call the board of Sterling Hospitality. Tell them I am standing in their flagship restaurant, and I am not happy. The silence that followed Lorenzo Valenti's phone call was heavier than the marble pillars holding up the ceiling of the Gilded Lily. It was a suffocating, physical weight. The background music, a soft, pretentious jazz loop, seemed to screech to a halt, though it was still playing. The only sound that mattered was the ragged breathing of Julian Thorne. Julian stood frozen, his hand still extended, in a half gesture of aggression that had now curdled into terror. The red wine stain on the carpet was spreading, seeping into the fibers, a permanent mark of his catastrophic error. Mr. Valenti, Julian croaked. His voice, previously booming and confident, was now a thin, trembling reed. I didn't know. You have to understand, it's been a stressful week. The IPO, the market pressure. Lorenzo Valenti didn't even look at him. He slowly placed his satellite phone back into his breast pocket, patting it gently as if it were a precious keepsake. He then picked up his linen napkin and unfolded it across his lap with agonizing slowness. Elena, Lorenzo said, his voice calm, ignoring the billionaire CEO standing 3 feet away. Per favore, portami del pane. Ho fame. Please bring me some bread. I'm hungry. Elena stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room, the wealthy patrons, the bus boys, the terrified Henri, burning into her. She was just a waitress. She was supposed to be invisible. But now, she was the only person in the room that the most powerful man in Europe was willing to acknowledge. Si, signore, Elena stammered. She moved to the side station, her hands shaking as she grabbed a fresh basket of artisan sourdough. Mr. Valenti, please. Julian stepped forward, desperation making him reckless. We're supposed to have a meeting on Thursday. My board prepared a presentation. If you buy the debt now, without the restructuring deal, you'll trigger a default clause. You'll bankrupt me personally. My stock options will be worthless. Lorenzo picked up a silver spoon and inspected it for spots. He still did not look at Julian. Henry, Lorenzo said. Henry, the manager, jumped as if he'd been electrocuted. Yes, Mr. Valenti. Anything you need, sir. I had no idea. Our reservation system didn't flag you. It's a glitch. I don't care about your system, Lorenzo said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, hard flint. This man is bothering me. He is disturbing my dinner. What is your policy for loud, aggressive patrons who throw food? Henry turned pale. He looked at Julian, his best customer, the man who dropped $5,000 on wine every Friday. Then he looked at Lorenzo Valenti, The man who could buy the entire city block without checking his bank balance. The calculation in Henri's eyes was transparent and pathetic. "Mr. Thorne," Henri said, his voice wavering. I think it would be best if you returned to your table, or perhaps called it a night." "You're kicking me out?" Julian screamed, his face turning purple. "I made this place, Henri. I put you on the map." "And you are currently unmaking yourself," Lorenzo said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The authority in his voice was absolute. "You threw a bread roll at me, Mr. Thorne. You threw a $100 bill at me as if I were a beggar. You mocked my clothes. You mocked my age." Lorenzo leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You see, Julian, I didn't come here tonight for the food. I came here to see you. I wanted to see the man I was about to invest 2 billion euros in. My analysts told me you were a genius. They said you were a visionary." Lorenzo gestured to the wine stain on the floor. "But a man who treats the help like garbage is not a visionary. He is a liability. A man who judges a book by its cover is a fool, and I do not do business with fools." "I can change," Julian pleaded, sweat dripping down his forehead. "I was just blowing off steam." "No," Lorenzo said simply. "You were revealing your character." At that moment, Elena returned with the bread. She placed it gently on the table. She wanted to run away, to hide in the locker room until her shift ended, but she couldn't leave this man alone. Lorenzo looked at her and smiled warmly, the ice leaving his eyes instantly. "Grazie, Elena." "You're welcome," she whispered. "Elena," Henri hissed, trying to regain some control. "Get back to your section. Table 6 is waiting." "Elena stays," Lorenzo said, cutting Henri off. "In fact, Elena is finished working for you." "Excuse me?" Henri blinked. "She is dining with me," Lorenzo announced. A gasp rippled through the dining room. A waitress? Dining with a billionaire? It broke every unspoken rule of the Gilded Lily. "Sir, that is against protocol," Henri argued weakly. "Staff are not permitted to fraternize." "I am buying the restaurant," Lorenzo interrupted. The silence returned, deeper this time. "I beg your pardon," Henri squeaked. Lorenzo pulled his phone out again. "I just sent a text to my acquisitions team. They are contacting Sterling Hospitality right now. I am offering them 20% above market value for this location. They will accept within 10 minutes. So technically, I am your boss. And I say, Elena is dining with me." Lorenzo kicked the chair opposite him out with his foot. He looked at Elena. "Siediti," he commanded gently. "Sit down." Elena looked at Henri, who looked like he was about to faint. She looked at Julian, who was clutching his hair, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. She looked at her dirty apron. I can't, sir. I'm in uniform. I'm dirty." "You are the only person in this room with clean hands," Lorenzo said. "Please, sit. I hate eating alone." Slowly, shakily, Elena untied her apron. She let it fall to the floor. She smoothed her black skirt and sat down opposite the titan of industry. Julian Thorne watched this happen, his world crumbling. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. It was a notification from Wall Street Journal. Breaking. Valenti Heavy Industries rumored to pull out of Apex Stream deal. APXS stock plummets. 40% in after-hours trading. You actually did it," Julian whispered, staring at his screen. "You destroyed me." "I haven't even started," Lorenzo said, breaking a piece of bread. "Now stand there and be quiet. I want to hear Elena's story." For the first time in the history of the Gilded Lily, the hierarchy was inverted. The billionaire CEO was standing, ignored, while the waitress sat at the best table, which was now whichever table Lorenzo Valenti chose to occupy. The bolognese arrived. Henri brought it himself, his hands shaking so badly the plates clattered against the table. He had tried to offer them a better table, a booth by the window, but Lorenzo had refused. He liked the corner. He said it gave him a good view of the rats. He looked at Henry when he said it. "Eat, Elena," Lorenzo said, pushing a plate toward her. "You look too thin. Americans do not understand how to feed people." Elena took a forkful of pasta. She was starving, but her stomach was in knots. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly in Italian. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Lorenzo replied, switching to Italian as well, locking them in a private bubble of communication that excluded everyone else. "I watched you. You were tired. You were abused. But you kept your dignity. And when this bambino attacked me, you defended me. You risked your job for a stranger." He took a sip of the house red wine and grimaced. "Terrible wine. Vinegar. I tried to warn you." Elena managed a small smile. "Tell me, Elena, why do you speak my language so beautifully? You have the accent of the Parioli district." Elena looked down at her pasta. "My father was Alessandro Vance. He was an art restorer. We lived in Rome until I was 12. He worked on the frescoes in the Vatican." Lorenzo paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Alessandro Vance, the man who restored the Caravaggio in Santa Maria del Popolo?" "Yes," Elena said, surprised. "You knew him?" "I knew his work," Lorenzo said respectfully. "He was a master, a true artist. What happened?" "He got sick," Elena said, the old pain surfacing. "Cancer. We moved back to New York for treatment at Sloan Kettering, but the insurance didn't cover everything. We lost the house. We lost the savings. He died 4 years ago." Lorenzo listened intensely. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking around the room. He was giving her his undivided attention, something Julian Thorne had probably never done for anyone in his life. "And now?" Lorenzo asked. "You are here?" "My mother," Elena confessed. "She has the same condition. It's genetic, early onset. I'm working double shifts here and at a diner in Queens to pay for her chemo. But the bills are faster than the paychecks." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was because he felt like a grandfather figure she had never had. Lorenzo nodded slowly. He didn't offer pity. He offered understanding. The American system. It is a machine that eats people. While they spoke, Julian Thorne had been frantically making calls in the corner of the room. He was trying to rally his board members, trying to get a lawyer, trying to stop the bleeding. "No, you don't understand," Julian shouted into his phone, breaking the intimate atmosphere. "Valenti is here. He's crazy. He's tanking the deal out of spite. You have to—" "What? What do you mean my accounts are frozen?" Julian lowered the phone, his face grey. He walked back to the table. "You froze my personal accounts," Julian said, his voice hollow. "I can't even pay for this dinner." "That is a problem," Lorenzo said, chewing his pasta. "Because I am certainly not paying for you. And Henri here," he pointed to the manager who was hovering nearby, "is very strict about the minimum spend." "This is illegal," Julian spat. "You can't just leverage a bank to freeze personal assets because of a dinner argument." "I didn't use the bank," Lorenzo said calmly. "I used the Studio Legale Rossi e Associati. Do you know them?" Julian flinched. Everyone in high finance knew the name. They were the most aggressive, expensive corporate litigators in Milan. They didn't just sue, they dismantled. "They just filed an injunction," Lorenzo explained, as if discussing the weather. "Based on the preliminary due diligence for the acquisition, we found some irregularities. In your personal spending, corporate funds used for private jets, dinners at the Gilded Lily listed as R&D expenses? Elena gasped. She looked at Henri. Henri looked away. That's standard practice, Julian argued. Not in my company, Lorenzo said. And since I now own the debt of Apex Stream, those irregularities are technically theft from me. So until we audit every single penny, you are frozen. You are poor, Mr. Thorne. Poorer than Eleanor. Lorenzo turned back to Eleanor. So, your mother. She is at Mount Sinai? Yes, Eleanor whispered, still reeling from the revelation that Julian was being investigated for fraud in real time. My private doctor is Dr. Sterling, no relation to the hotel group, Lorenzo chuckled. He is the head of oncology at Johns Hopkins, but he flies to wherever I am. I will have him see your mother tomorrow. Elena dropped her fork. I can't afford that. Dr. Sterling he's famous. You are not paying, Lorenzo said sternly. Consider it a bonus for the new position. New position? Elena asked. I cannot have my dinner companion working for a fool like Henri, Lorenzo said. You are hired. Valenti Heavy Industries needs a liaison in New York. Someone who speaks Italian, someone who understands the culture, and someone who is not afraid to stand up to arrogant men in suits. You start tonight. Your first job is to finish this pasta. It's getting cold. I don't know anything about heavy industry, Elena said, tears welling in her eyes. You know about people, Lorenzo said. I can teach you about steel. I cannot teach you about character. You have that already. Suddenly, the front doors of the restaurant burst open. It wasn't another customer. It was a team of 4 men in dark suits, carrying briefcases. They moved with military precision. Leading them was a sharp-featured woman with glasses and a tablet. She scanned the room, spotted Lorenzo, and marched straight over. Mr. Valenti, she said, ignoring the chaos of the room. We received your directive. The paperwork for the acquisition of the Gilded Lily is being drafted. The board of Sterling Hospitality is on video conference in the car. They are eager to apologize. Good, Lorenzo said. Sophia, this is Eleanor. She is our new VP of Cultural Relations for the North American sector. Put her on the payroll immediately. Tier 1 salary, full benefits, retroactive to the beginning of this year. Sophia didn't even blink. She typed on her tablet. Done. Need her social security number and bank details. Julian Thorne slumped into a chair at the next table, putting his head in his hands. He was watching his life dissolve. You can't do this, he sobbed. I was the king of New York this morning. The sun sets quickly, Julian, Lorenzo said. He stood up and wiped his mouth. Sophia, deal with the bill. And deal with Mr. Thorne. Ensure he pays for his own meal. If he cannot, have him wash the dishes. Lorenzo offered his arm to Eleanor. Come, Eleanor. Let us go somewhere where the wine does not taste like battery acid. We have much to discuss about your future. Eleanor stood up. She looked at her old uniform on the floor. She looked at Henri, who was now trembling before Sophia. She looked at Julian, the man who had terrorized her for months, now broken. She took Lorenzo's arm. Wait, Julian cried out as they walked toward the door. What about me? What happens to me? Lorenzo stopped and turned back one last time. You? Lorenzo smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You are going to be a lesson, a cautionary tale. When people ask what happened to Julian Thorne, they will say, he laughed at the wrong man, and he underestimated the waitress. They walked out into the rain, but this time, a chauffeur was waiting with a dry umbrella. However, the story wasn't over. As the sleek black town car pulled away, Elena looked out the back window. She saw a police cruiser pulling up to the Gilded Lily. "Is that for Julian?" she asked. Lorenzo's face darkened. "Julian is a distraction, Elena. He is a small fish. But in his financial records, my lawyers found something else. Something much bigger than embezzled dinners. Julian was laundering money. And not for himself." Lorenzo looked at Elena, his expression serious. "Do you know the name, the Syndicate?" Elena shook her head. "Good," Lorenzo said, "because they are the ones Julian was working for. And now that I have crushed him, they will be looking for who is responsible. We have kicked a hornet's nest, Figliola. Are you ready for a fight?" Elena looked at the city lights blurring past. She thought of her mother. She thought of the way she had stood up to Julian. "I have nothing left to lose," Elena said. "Good," Lorenzo said, "because the war has just begun." The morning after the incident at the Gilded Lily, Elena Vance woke up, but she didn't wake up in her cramped, drafty apartment in Queens, where the radiator rattled like a dying engine. She woke up in the master guest suite of the Valenti Plaza on Fifth Avenue. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, with a thread count so high they felt like liquid silk. For a moment, she panicked, her heart racing as she scrambled to sit up, the events of the previous night crashing into her memory like a fever dream. The rain, the humiliation, the older man, the job offer. VP of Cultural Relations. It sounded like a joke, a cruel prank. She swung her legs out of bed and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Central Park lay below her, a lush green rectangle cut out of the grey city. Her old life, the subway commutes, the aching feet, the stack of overdue bills, felt a million miles away, yet she knew it was waiting for her just outside the glass. A soft knock came at the door. "Enter," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't a maid. It was Sophia, the sharp-eyed woman with the tablet from the restaurant. She looked as immaculate at 7 a.m. as she had at midnight. "Good morning, Miss Vance," Sophia said briskly. "Mr. Valenti is waiting for you in the library. Your wardrobe has been updated." Sophia gestured to a rolling rack of clothes that had been silently wheeled into the room while Eleanor slept. It wasn't flashy designer wear. It was power armor. Tailored blazers, silk blouses, structured trousers. Colors of navy, charcoal, and cream. "I can't wear this," Elena whispered, touching a cashmere sleeve. "This jacket costs more than my car." "The car you don't need anymore," Sophia corrected, without looking up from her tablet. "The company driver is downstairs. Also, Dr. Sterling called. Your mother was transferred to the VIP wing of Mount Sinai at 3 a.m. She is resting comfortably. The first round of the new immunotherapy protocol begins at noon." Elena felt her knees give out. She grabbed the back of a velvet armchair to steady herself. "He really did it? He actually did it?" "Lorenzo Valenti does not make idle promises," Sophia said, her voice softening just a fraction. "But he expects results. Get dressed. The wolves are already circling." 30 minutes later, Elena walked into the library. It was a massive room smelling of leather and old paper. Lorenzo was sitting by a fireplace, reading a physical newspaper, a cup of espresso on the table. He looked up. He didn't smile, but his eyes assessed her with approval. "You look like a Roman," he said. "Good. The armor fits." "Mr. Valenti," Eleanor began. "Lorenzo," he corrected. "We are partners now. Or we will be if you survive the day." "Survive?" Elena asked. Lorenzo folded the newspaper. "Turn on the television." Eleanor picked up the remote and clicked on the screen mounted above the fireplace. It was tuned to a financial news network. The headline banner was flashing red. "Scandal at Apex Stream. CEO Julian Thorne arrested in dawn raid. The footage showed Julian Thorne being led out of his Tribeca penthouse in handcuffs. He looked disheveled, wild-eyed, shouting at the cameras. "I was set up. Valenti is the devil. Check the accounts. I was forced to do it." The reporter's voice cut in. Authorities seized servers and documents early this morning, following a tip-off regarding massive embezzlement and international money laundering. Sources say the evidence was handed over by Valenti Heavy Industries, the potential buyer of the tech giant. Elena turned off the TV. "You destroyed him in 12 hours. "He destroyed himself," Lorenzo said, taking a sip of espresso. "I merely turned on the lights. But his screaming, that is the problem. Did you hear what he said?" "I was forced to do it." Lorenzo stood up and walked to the window. The playful grandfatherly demeanor from the restaurant was gone. In his place was the silent king, a man who had survived corporate wars for 40 years. "Julian is a coward," Lorenzo explained. "Cowards do not launder $50 million alone. They do not have the connections to move money through offshore shell companies in the Caymans and Macau. Julian was a front man, a puppet." "The syndicate," Elena remembered the name he had mentioned in the car. "Correct," Lorenzo turned to her. "My analysts have been going through Julian's encrypted files all night. We found a recurring name in the ledgers. Caronte." "Charon," Elena translated instinctively. "The ferryman of the dead in mythology." "Exactly," Lorenzo nodded. "Someone was paying Julian to pump inflated profits into Apex Stream to wash dirty money. When I froze the accounts last night, I trapped that money. I trapped their money. $50 million of cartel cash is now sitting in a frozen account that only I can access." "They will come for it," Elena realized, a cold chill running down her spine. "They will come for me," Lorenzo said. "And because you are now publicly listed as my executive liaison, they will be curious about you." Lorenzo walked over to her and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "I brought you into this world to save your dignity, Elena. But I may have placed you in danger. If you want to walk away, take a check, take the medical care for your mother, and disappear, I will understand. You can go to the police. You can go into hiding." Eleanor thought about the way Julian had looked at her. Like she was trash. Like she was nothing. She thought about Henri, the manager, bowing to power. She thought about her father, dying without proper care because they were nobodies. She wasn't a nobody anymore. "I speak Italian," Elena said, her voice steadying. "I speak French. I know how to read people. And I know what it's like to be invisible." "Maybe that helps?" Lorenzo smiled, a wolfish grin. "It helps immensely. The invisible see everything." "Then I stay," Elena said. "Good," Lorenzo said, "because we have a meeting at 10 a.m. with the board of directors of Sterling Hospitality. We are going to buy that restaurant, and you are going to fire Henry." The headquarters of Sterling Hospitality was a glass monolith in Midtown. The conference room on the 40th floor offered a panoramic view of the skyline, but the mood inside was claustrophobic. 12 board members sat around a long mahogany table. They were mostly older men in grey suits, looking nervous. At the head of the table sat Damon Cross, the chairman of the board. Damon Cross was a shark. He was 50, tanned, with teeth that were too white and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't look like a hotelier. He looked like a mercenary in a silk tie. When Lorenzo walked in, the room went silent. But when Eleanor walked in behind him, carrying a leather portfolio, the whispers started. They knew who she was. The waitress. The charity case. "Gentlemen," Lorenzo said, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table from Damon. "And Miss Vance, please sit." Eleanor sat to Lorenzo's right. She opened her portfolio. Her hands were sweating, but she kept her face neutral. Be invisible until you need to be seen, she told herself. Lorenzo, Damon Cross said, leaning back, we were surprised by your hostile offer for the Gilded Lily. It's our flagship. It's not for sale. Everything is for sale, Damon, Lorenzo said calmly. Especially when your brand reputation is currently circling the drain. A viral video of your manager allowing a billionaire to abuse an elderly man. It has 3 million views on TikTok this morning. Damon waved his hand dismissively. Bad publicity blows over. We fired Henri. Problem solved. I don't think so, Lorenzo said. I am offering 20% over market value. It is a generous exit. We decline, Damon said sharply. The other board members looked surprised. The offer was incredibly good. Why would Damon refuse? Elena watched Damon closely. She watched his hands. He was tapping a pen against the table, rapidly. Tap, tap, tap. She looked at the papers in front of him. They were upside down to her, but she had spent years reading upside-down orders on customer tables. It was a skill every waitress learned. There was a memo on top of his stack. It wasn't a sterling hospitality letterhead. It was an email printout. The header was obscured, but she caught a few words in the body of the text. Frozen accounts. Delivery delayed. Pressure him. And then a signature at the bottom. Not a name. A symbol. A small, stylized boat. The ferryman. Elena's breath hitched. Damon Cross wasn't just protecting the restaurant. He was connected to Julian Thorne. He was connected to the money. Mr. Valenti, Elena spoke up. Damon's head snapped toward her. The help does not speak in board meetings, sweetheart. I am the Vice President of Cultural Relations, Elena said, her voice ringing clear. And I noticed something interesting, Mr. Cross. She stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the side of the room. She picked up a marker. Mr. Cross, Elena said, turning to the board. Why is the chairman so eager to keep the Gilded Lily? It loses money. I've seen the nightly receipts. The food cost is too high. The waste is astronomical. It's a failing asset. Sit down, Damon barked. Unless, Elena continued, ignoring him. The restaurant isn't a restaurant. It's a laundromat. She wrote a number on the board. $5,000. That was Julian Thorne's average wine tab every Friday, Elena said. But we never served him bottles worth that much. He was billed for Chateau Margaux 1982, but he drank the house Pinot Noir. I poured it myself. The board members began to murmur. Where did the extra money go? Elena asked, looking directly at Damon. If the restaurant books show $5,000 in sales, but the inventory shows only $50 in product cost, that is a profit margin that doesn't exist in the hospitality industry, unless you are washing cash. Damon stood up, his face red. This is slander. I will sue you. Lorenzo, Damon shouted. Control your pet. Lorenzo didn't move. He was watching Eleanor with a look of intense pride. Continue, Eleanor. Julian Thorne was laundering money through his tech company, Eleanor said, piecing it together in real time. But he needed a place to spend the dirty cash to make it look like legitimate consumption. The Gilded Lily. It was a closed loop. Julian brings the dirty money in, buys fake wine, the restaurant records it as legitimate revenue, and the money comes out clean on the sterling balance sheet. Eleanor turned to the other board members. Did you know that sterling hospitality was being used as a washing machine for cartel money? Because if you didn't, you are incompetent, and if you did, you are accomplices. The room erupted. 3 board members stood up, shouting demands for an internal audit. Damon Cross looked like he was about to jump across the table and strangle Elena. Get out! Damon screamed. Security! Sit down, Damon, Lorenzo said. His voice was a low growl that cut through the noise. Lorenzo slid a folder across the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of Damon. "My lawyers sent this to the SEC 5 minutes ago," Lorenzo said. "And to the FBI. Elena is right, isn't she? The boat symbol. Caronte." Damon froze. He looked at the folder, then at Elena. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," Damon whispered. "You think Julian was the problem? Julian was a child. You have stolen from people who do not file lawsuits. They file obituaries." Damon grabbed his phone and typed a single message. Then he looked at Elena. "Enjoy your lunch, Miss Vance. It will be your last." Damon turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the board in chaos. Lorenzo stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Come, Elena. We have the restaurant. The board will capitulate now that Damon is burned." They walked out of the building, flanked by Sophia and 2 large security guards. "You were magnificent," Lorenzo said, as they reached the lobby. "You saw the wine discrepancy. I missed that." "I poured the wine," Elena said, adrenaline still coursing through her. "I knew what he was drinking." They stepped out onto the sidewalk. The sun was shining, a stark contrast to the storm of the previous night. "I am hungry," Lorenzo said. "Let us go to a real Italian place. My grandmother's recipes." But as the valet pulled up the black town car, Elena's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered it. "Hello?" A voice, digitally altered and deep, spoke. "Elena Vance." "Who is this?" "You are a smart girl, but you talk too much. You took something that belongs to us." "I don't know who you are," Elena said, her hand tightening on the phone. "Look across the street." Elena looked. On the opposite corner, amidst the lunchtime crowd of New York, stood a man in a grey hoodie. He wasn't looking at her. He was holding a sign, a cardboard sign like a homeless person. But the sign didn't ask for money. It had a single word written in red marker. "Mama." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "She is in the hospital. She is sick." "Hospitals are dangerous places," the voice said. "Accidents happen. Machines malfunction. Nurses give the wrong dose." "What do you want?" Elena pleaded, stepping away from Lorenzo so he wouldn't hear. "Lorenzo Valenti has a key, a digital key to the frozen accounts. You are going to get it for us. Tonight, at the gala. You have 12 hours, or your mother's next dose of medicine will be her last." The line went dead. Elena stared at the man across the street. He dropped the sign into a trash can and vanished into the crowd. "Elena," Lorenzo called out from the open car door. "Are you coming?" Elena turned to look at the man who had saved her life, the man who treated her like a daughter. She had to betray him, or her mother would die. She forced a smile onto her face. It felt like a mask of glass. "Yes, Lorenzo," she said, her voice hollow. "I'm coming." She got into the car, the door closing with a heavy thud, sealing her into a trap of her own making. The Metropolitan Opera Gala was a sea of diamonds and tuxedos, but Eleanor felt like she was drowning. In her clutch, her phone felt like a bomb. Every vibration was a reminder. Time is running out. Lorenzo Valenti stood beside her, greeting senators and celebrities with easy charm. He looked invincible. Elena felt sick. She had to get his fingerprint to access the secure tablet in his jacket pocket. It was the only way to transfer the key the syndicate demanded. "You are shaking, Elena," Lorenzo murmured, handing her a glass of champagne. "The cold or the fear?" Elena looked at him. She couldn't do it. She couldn't betray the man who had given her back her life. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They have my mother. They're going to kill her if I don't give them access to the accounts tonight. She braced herself for his anger. She expected him to push her away. Instead, Lorenzo took a sip of his drink and checked his watch. I was wondering when you would tell me. You lasted longer than I expected. Most people would have broken in the car. Elena stared at him. You knew? Elena, I am a billionaire in the defense industry, Lorenzo said dryly. I have had a security detail on your mother since the moment I hired you. The man with the sign? My snipers were watching him. The nurse who threatened her? She was arrested 10 minutes ago. Elena let out a sob of relief, her legs nearly giving way. Lorenzo steadied her with a firm grip on her elbow. So my mother is safe? She is eating Jell-O and watching game shows, guarded by 2 former Navy SEALs, Lorenzo assured her. But the syndicate does not know that. They are waiting for the key. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. Give them this, he said, pressing it into her hand. What is it? The access codes. No. Lorenzo smiled, a terrifyingly cold smile. It is a beacon. As soon as they plug this into their server to steal the money, it will upload a virus that wipes their data and broadcasts their exact GPS location to the FBI, Interpol, and the Carabinieri. Elena looked at the silver drive. It wasn't a surrender, it was a weapon. She met the contact, a waiter with cold eyes, by the kitchen doors. She handed him the drive. He smirked, whispered, "Good girl," and vanished. 10 minutes later, the music stopped. Phones began to buzz all over the ballroom. News alerts. Massive FBI raid on Syndicate HQ in New Jersey. Damon Cross arrested at gala. Across the room, Damon Cross dropped his glass. Police were swarming the exits. Lorenzo raised his glass to Elena. To the invisible, he said. They never see us coming. Elena clinked her glass against his. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a Valenti. And just like that, the arrogance of the elite became their own undoing. Julian Thorne lost his company, Damon Cross lost his freedom, and the syndicate lost everything. All because they laughed at an old man in a cheap suit and underestimated the woman standing beside him. It's a powerful reminder. True power isn't about how loud you shout or how expensive your watch is. It's about character, loyalty, and the quiet strength to stand up for what's right, even when your voice is shaking. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the underdog can win. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Elena's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.